So Michael, you've had a let's say a little bit of a not as conventional path as most medical doctors in terms of your life path to where you are now, working at Sunraven as a healing retreat center. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey and the path to where you are now.
Well, I started off at the age of 7, looking forward to becoming a physician. I don't know exactly why it started at that early of an age, but I think maybe my grandmother had something to do with it. And she suggested that I don't follow my father and her husband in the footsteps of a family business, but that I do something out in the world in terms of healing. And I embraced that. And through school, I succeeded enough academically to have that as an opportunity. And it was a very rewarding journey from that point of view. Even through my transition, when I left conventional medicine ultimately, 20, 30 years after that, I always enjoyed practicing medicine, even in the conventional way. But what happened to me was, along the mid-course of my life, I realized that there was something limiting about the Western medicine that I had been studying. That I was helping people deal with emergencies, acute problems, but when it came to the project of living their lives and becoming happier through health, I was not really trained to do that. In fact, I think Western society in general didn't offer me, as a product of the West, a good context in which to apply wholesome and holistic healing. So I eventually decided that I needed to go back to school and back to study. At that point, it was integrative medicine, integrative and holistic medicine, and I chose to do that about 15 years ago. Once I started to become familiar with all the other things that could contribute to people's healing, I realized that it had to come outside of the medical institution, particularly the buildings of a hospital or even a medical practice, and that I needed to relate more of my practice to nature, the natural world, and back in community. Not into these artificial buildings and sort of sterile buildings, but to people's homes and to my own home and my own neighborhood. And so I sought, after deciding to leave conventional medicine or to go beyond it, I sought to find a place where I could then practice in concert with nature and in community. And that was how I ultimately started to look for a place like Sunraven, where we are now, which is a center I call for holistic and skillful living.
And what would you consider to be some of the themes that have influenced you and just drive you to do what you do?
Well, the first principle is that our health is often defined in a limiting fashion. When I referred back to medicine being limited or limiting, often as we apply it in this very technologically advanced world that we live in, we see it as a mechanic would look at a car. Something is broken and we're going to fix it. But I see health in a broader context, not just as the repair of a physically damaged thing, but that a living being amidst lives of others. And so that requires looking at health in the context of something broader than our own individual lives. To get fully, immersed into the living aspect and to heal. Actually, to heal our body. The same body that we're interested in going to a doctor can heal, and I think more effectively when we put it into that context.
Right. And what you were saying before about your own path, it brought to mind, I personally don't make too many visits to doctors' offices. I'm fairly healthy, but when I've gone or I've accompanied someone else, it seems like every time, even to a dentist's office, there's always a TV that's blaring. And I think, here you are in a very peaceful setting, and modern medicine just misses this whole point of the context that we're in and what that means for health. And it's just so soul-jarring to hear that loud noise.
I agree. I think that it's similar to the experience people have when they go on vacation. They go to this idyllic place, let's say a beach, with beautiful weather, and then the transition back to home is conceivably could unravel all the benefits of the 7 days away. And so my work then sort of started to take that into consideration, so that I started to practice in a home environment so that it could help people model that for their own inner worlds, meaning their own personal world of self, but also their relationships with the people that they live with.
Right. Now I was going to ask you a question about your book that just came out this year in May 2013 called 77 Questions for Skillful Living, A New Path for Extraordinary Health. Since you're saying something that I read in the book that I want to ask you first, so I'm skipping a little ahead, because you talk about like people being more integrated, their personal life, their professional life. So, right. And so you talk about like people going on vacation, and that's where they feel more integrated. But it's as you teach your patients and the groups you lead, that's really essentially and one of the core principles in your book. Then, right?
It is. It is to make it practical. In other words, we could all read something and be inspired, but if we can't incorporate the inspiration into the way we conduct our lives, then it's a nice idea, but it is not necessarily something that's going to affect the change that allows us to feel that state of happiness, health, vitality. And so the idea behind my book, and writing it, is to really bring things together, both in those conceptual ways, but then to make it practical. And I take on from a lot of my own experience. I've had all these same experiences where I thought I was getting there, but then I realized the transition back home was not part of what I had been taught or my orientation and even going to begin with. So I think it requires coherence. It requires putting these great ideas together with a good practice.
And are the 77 questions a personal checklist that a person can go back to time and time again?
Yeah, exactly. That's how I first encountered them. In fact, something similar was presented to me when I joined the American Holistic Medical Association. A man named Robert Ivker, who's become a friend of mine, who's a physician who wrote the foreword for my book, created that question set to provide to physicians who are joining the American Holistic Medical Association as a way to sort of introduce the concept that health is not just the physical variables that a lot of doctors have been taught to measure and respond to. So it was giving those physicians who are becoming part of this organization sort of an introduction to a broader definition of health. And I took that on, I completed it as I was instructed to, and I realized, gee, these are some good things for me to work on. And so I went back to them over and over again to sort of look at the things that I can continuously improve. It was sort of a good inventory for the project of becoming healthier and more functional and happier beings. So yeah, so that's how I encountered those questions, and that's how I intend to use them. So I incorporated them first into my practice. I refined the questions. I made them fit into the community and to the people that I was working with. It wasn't now I was giving it to physicians, I was giving it to real people. And so I changed the questions a little bit to make them feel right.
Yeah, and it's really written in such a plain, easy to understand way, but also thoughtful. A lot of the questions are things that will cause people to just ponder and contemplate more about themselves. So since you mentioned health, how would you define health? I mean, you work in the field of health. Modern medicine is more sick care oriented, say, and now you've gone in a different direction. But to you, what helps a person understand what health is?
Well, I think that we've all had the experience of looking at our health in the physical dimensions and working there and realizing that even if we were successful, it doesn't necessarily solve every problem that we're experiencing. So let's say we all lose weight to get to a more ideal weight. Everyone's probably had some experience with that. Or we change our diet just to feel like we're consuming things more mindfully. Or we exercise more like doctors are telling us. We can even get to the point where we can run a marathon. A lot of people come home and they're arguing with all the people they're living with and they hate their job. Well, so they realize they wake up in the morning, they're not feeling so great. That the definition of health that, measured by their cholesterol, their blood pressure, how long they live, is really not getting to all of it. And so my definition of health is to broaden it to the experience of living, to how we actually feel. And of course, our physical body makes a big difference with regard to how we feel. So it's an important part of this of health and the achievement of health, but it also must include then the quality of our relationships. It must include our relationship to nature and a relationship to perhaps what I would call a divine principle, something that goes beyond our physical existence at the time to the larger picture. You know, what's the meaning of our life? And I think when people then put all that together, they're getting closer to understanding the dimensions of health, and then the path toward extraordinary health becomes more evident to include the things that contribute to all those things being developed simultaneously.
Right, that we're part of the environment we live in.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in your book titled 77 Questions for Skillful Living, what do you mean by the skillful living part?
Well, so to me, it's the achievement. There is no end game. You know, there's no end point where you say, now I'm a successful person. The word living is a verb. And so it implies that there is a constant activity ongoing. And therefore, the idea, the project, if you will, is to learn to live with skill. And so that it's the developing and the ongoing development of skills that help you live with better intention, better quality, and ultimately better feeling. Our physicians are not the people we are going to be able to ask to get to that type of health. We can ask them to remove our appendix when we have appendicitis or fix our broken leg. And they're the best at doing those two things. And others that are similar, particularly the emergent life-threatening conditions. I mean, we're fortunate to have the technology and the medical care available, but the in between those visits, which for many people are few and far between, fortunately, the project of living is not the place for the Western trained physician. So we're asking a person to take care of us a certain way that doesn't have those tools. It would be like asking a carpenter to paint your house. Well, it would be a good question, but the wrong person. And so, to me, the Western model is limited. And I think that's fair. And it's not an indictment. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just limited. But it's limiting when we look at it as if it's going to solve all those issues. And so, for me, it's about helping people see the difference between the values and the place for Western medicine, and the call for more. So we would integrate a doctor, a priest, a teacher, our community, the natural world. If we as individuals can integrate all those things nicely ourselves, we can do it, but we often will need better guidance. And when I looked around the universe of literature, I didn't see something written by a practical woman, on the subject of integrating all of that, not as a physician. So that was part of the reasons and the motivation for me to organize my thinking to write this book.
Yeah. So since the paradigm you work with now is healing, where do you think deep and true healing comes from?
You're asking a really good question, I must say it, and I sort of like the question but it's a difficult answer. It goes beyond our physical body and our existence, and as you are aware, and I hope we get a chance to talk about, my thinking is that as individuals, we have two simultaneous projects. One is to take care of ourselves, because the better we take care of ourselves, the more we can contribute to the world around us. But the other is the world around us, and the essential nature of that world and our responsibility in it. Now, not everyone chooses to be consciously responsible to taking care of the world around them. Some people may just realize it, though, in a different form, like raising their children or teaching or to help society in some other way. But I think we all have personal investment in the world around us, and many of us choose to endeavor to spend time and commit ourselves to help others or help the natural world. But I think the two are as important as each other, that one cannot exist without the other. And I think we live at a time in our culture where we tend to focus more on ourselves, quite honestly. There are those also who work on the world, but then they neglect themselves. So integrating the two, I think, is what's really important.
Right. And the flip side of that question about deep healing, where that comes from, is what do you think lies at the root of most disease?
I read recently a Native American leader saying that we're living in a world now where people in the West are the walking dead. He was referring to the fact that we're soulless, that we're constructing bigger and better buildings, where we have more technology, we have more things, but we have less heart, we have less soul. That we have less connection. What he's really saying, we have less connection to our ancestors and less connection to our descendants. In the Native American world, 7 generations past and future are what is considered the life of the individual now living, that they're connected so intimately to those 14 generations. And we live for the now. There are even books written about the now, and it's true how important the now moment is, but we have to, I think it's important to consider our real relationship, our real relationship to the people who just preceded us in 7 generations and the people who will follow in very real terms. So I think with that we retain our soul, our heart, and our orientation is not just to the things we possess and how much we have at the moment of our death, but what our legacy is, and even what will transcend us, and the concept of conscious evolution, which is how we're even directing through our choices where we're all going to be heading in sort of this maybe very high existential way, but that it's actually quite practical. We actually are involved in it.
Right. So it's really helping a person ground more, be more grounded in their life and their connection with nature, as you've talked about, but so many things, their community.
Well, what I would say on that is, because I want to be clear on this point, it's the simultaneous grounding and transcendence. I think that there are a lot of traditions where transcendence is the primary focus. Like you leave your spiritual body, that you don't really, the physical body is often described as a vehicle or as a temporary thing, not very consequential. I don't know that I completely ascribe to that. I like some of those thoughts about how important the transcendent is. But we also are very sensate. We have this physical body, and I'd like to believe that we have it for a reason. And that the reason is to connect the dots between the grounded world, the real world between us, and something that goes beyond. That we actually have a real responsibility in the quality and the specific evolution of the transcendent universe. And so, to me, it's the integration of those two things. And I don't know that there's many conversations about the two together. It's sort of, you go to a spiritual bookshelf and you see spiritual books, and you go to the grounded bookshelf and you see Western medicine, you see alternative medicine. But I want to create the dialogue between the two and marry those two as skillful living. This is what I mean by that. Okay,
so now I understand it even more. I mean, I understood it first, but you'd say that there's many layers to that term.
Yes.
And really, ultimately, it's living, I don't know, in a more enlightened way in our everyday, living every day.
Conscious and consciously aware that our body requires attention for other reasons than just our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense, which leads me to a question, because I saw on your website that you were described as a self-professed doctor of common sense. So I really like that. I'm wondering what you mean by that phrase.
Well, I think that I'm trying in my work always, and I've always done this in my practice, even when I was purely Western trained and Western approach, to help people use their common sense to discriminate all the choices that they have and all the advice that they're receiving. So when I say that, I think I have a pretty decent amount of common sense, but the reason I would say that I sort of like I use that term is that I'm helping cultivate common sense in other individuals, to have them become more trusting of their own instincts, their own senses, their own ability to discern and then to make good decisions.
Yeah. So I would think that you see patients privately in long consultation form, different from standard medical model, mm-hmm. and I would wonder, the type of patients you see probably come from two schools. One, it's a 180-degree change for them, and others who are already there but need more direction. So would you say a lot of the people, as you were saying, are getting conflicting information or so much information. So that's one of the things you're helping them do.
Yeah. And exactly. And I think common sense is a good place to help them begin, because we're flooded with information and ideas, and from many credible sources. So that's the confusing part. It's two really credible individuals with similar backgrounds are saying things that seem mutually exclusive. So then how do you decide? How do you determine? A lot of people are getting upset, frustrated, irritated that they're not getting, consistent advice from different people, so that they wind up wandering through, this forest and this maze. So it's an important job for somebody to help people sort of sort through all of that. And the first thing that I choose to do is I settle them down and I tell them stories. And this is the nature, what I have included in my books too, stories about nature, the natural world, which we all have witnessed, we've all had experience with, so that we can see, yes, no, I figured that out. I know that a gazelle is not digesting food when it's running from a lion. I know that if I'm under stress, I'm not going to digest the meal I had either. That it doesn't require really to go to medical school to understand the most basic, mechanisms within us. And then we can take that same discussion to the states of emotion and the states of existential crisis, spirituality, any of the subjects that people then start attending to when they put their whole life together.
Yeah, and in reading your book also, it seems like a core theme is this concept of taking control, ownership, empowerment, or ownership. And I think it's a really important theme in life in general. So I'm wondering what role you think ownership plays in healing when a person takes responsibility for what caused their health problems, and also takes responsibility for the healing process.
Well, there's a number of questions in there that to address. So let me start off by saying, since so much of my work is leading to people to answer the question, how do you feel, in a more affirmative way. So feeling is such an important part of it, that I would sort of reflect your question with a question, which is, how does it feel when you're driving versus how do you feel when you're a passenger and the car's out of control? So it's much better to be the driver in terms of your feeling state. Doesn't mean that the outcome's going to be that much different, but along the way, the feeling state of being in control is valuable. Because the feeling of being out of control is much worse. So I want to help direct people back to that sense of confidence, that they know what they're doing, at least why they're doing it. So I think that that's part of the answer to that question, and the why that I work so hard to help people regain control. But the fact of the matter is, when we're in more control, we're a little less stressed. And when we're a little less stressed, the physiological processes that go on underneath the surface in our bodies, which are inflammatory and destructive, tend to quiet down a little bit. And so our healing process, our healing mechanisms, which are very natural, they work all the time, are in a better position to work for us when we're in control. It doesn't mean overly confident, arrogant. It means feeling clear on where we're going and what we're doing. We live in a society where we're really damaged by repression, not just being victimized, which we are as well in terms of abuse, but we're also told we don't know enough to make decisions for ourselves. We need experts for everything. So our self-confidence and our self-esteem is at a low point, I think, culturally, if you look at it, at least in terms of the individual. Even though some people are really good at what they do and they feel proud, when it comes to their health, where they're going with their lives, I think we don't attend to that very much, and I think a lot of people, for the first time start thinking about it and realize, gee, I don't know what I'm doing, when they really look at themselves in the mirror and are honest. So what you're saying is then, another important comment, about where we are, and that it's having some sense of control and awareness makes us feel a little less vulnerable to other people's direction and their repression or their outright abuse.
Right, and also it empowers a person to not feel a victim, because you'll hear someone say, "Oh, I was always healthy my whole life, and all of a sudden I developed cancer," as if it was God striking down on them, realizing, but that could help them connect the dots that your practices, your lifestyle practices, did play a role.
Well, and that's true, and I would say, and I would add very quickly that it's important not in this process to make people feel ashamed or guilty for some of those choices. Some of those things are done unconsciously or are led by the way society moves us. And people don't usually like to be told that they're that responsible. And I'm sensitive to that. The fact is that people do things that are self-destructive, aware of them or not. The idea for me is to understand a little bit about where you came from, but to understand just what exists at the moment and move forward. Yeah. So there has to be a certain amount of honesty. There has to be really looking in the mirror and accepting what is without dwelling there, because that can be just too painful, and just say, okay, well, this is what is. I don't want to necessarily stay here any longer than I have to, but to go from here to there being a better place, I need to take more responsibility than I have before. Now I'm conscious. Now I can make better decisions.
Right, so it's couching it in a positive way that helps a person feel they can do it.
Right, and it is, the word positive is very important here, because if I was to beat people down with, well, you smoke cigarettes, that's why you're sick, I would defeat the individual, the heart and the soul of the same individual I'm trying to help. So I can only say it's maybe understandable why that you may have done those things, and it's going to be, you know, sort of a challenge for you. But there's maybe meaning in this challenge. You may have, you know, there may be reasons why this happened. Now let's look for the positive. Let's look for what you can learn from this, because when you learn, mistakes no longer are legitimately called mistakes.
Now you talk about in your book the concept of inflammation, which is written about a lot and people know about in terms of anti-inflammatory diet. But you take it a lot further in your writing and talk about more than just diet, more than just stress, or you outline various forms of stress, and you get very specific and talk about relationships, arguing, work as also causes of inflammation. So what do you mean by that?
If you break apart the word inflammation to its Latin origins, it's flame, fire, it's heat, you know, in the way you look at it. So anything that causes heat or anything that causes friction is going to be inflammatory. So we know there's certain foods that do that because of what they do on, again, a physiological level in our body. But we also have to realize that rubbing the wrong way or being rubbed the wrong way by other individuals or by words, statements, images, can create energetically and physiologically the same heat phenomena. Our body responds the same way. We can, I would even take it further, be inflamed by virtue of this friction phenomena if we're not in alignment with our life's purpose. Which is why I keep getting to in my coherence idea is that we have to take care of ourselves, but we also have to align that project with the movement of our collective. And so we can take good care of ourselves in some ways, but then be at odds with everyone around us. That's causing friction, and that's inflammatory.
Oh, so that's really interesting, you know, and I think enlightening for a lot of people to read it, because you write it in such, you know, easy to understand approach. You talk in your book about a very profound concept, the importance of a life purpose. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that, again, that's another question. So here's the question. So if I was a magician, really powerful magician, I had a wand and I could wave it, because you came into my office and you listed all your problems, and I can get rid of all your problems. Okay, so every one of your physical problems, your emotional problems, your relationship problems, even the spiritual quest problem, then I would ask you a question. Now what would you do with your life? So with this life now that's in perfect balance and harmony, and you know, you feel great, now what are you going to do? So that question dominates in my mind all the others, and the reason is because without clarity on the purpose of our lives, the meaning of our individual life, our body unconsciously, or our mind unconsciously, or the subconscious spaces, doesn't know where to align. You know, people talk about the power of the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind, and if it's not clear where it's going, it's not going to work for you. This is what we know happens. People defeat themselves because they have ambivalence. You know, they hear advice and it just doesn't feel right to them. So, and it's not because sometimes the advice is wrong, but it's not embedded in the context that makes sense of it. So for me, purpose has to be part of the conversation. An individual may not be able to figure out their life purpose immediately. This is a big question. and it takes some time. But there should be an intentional and very specific effort to put that question on the table and to keep on it until for more and more clarity, seeking more and more clarity. And when there's more clarity, the alignment of the subconscious, unconscious mind, the physical body, will happen more on its own than we experience at the moment.
So that's a really good point. So being that it's one of the 77 questions of life purpose, when patients see you individually, is that something, even in an initial session, you may ask them?
Yeah, I try to say exactly what I just said to you.
Yeah.
If I was that good, I could just take away your problem and we'd be done with this conversation. Now what would you do?
Yeah.
Leaves most people feeling, most people stop in their tracks and say, gee, I hadn't thought about that. When they realize they haven't thought about it, they realize why then all the work that they've done in the preceding years of their life has sort of been disorganized to some extent, and that most people have this experience. They do a lot of work and they don't get as far as they think they should. That's why they come to see me. They've been to great doctors and they've been to alternative practitioners and they've read a lot of books, and they're still not feeling completely in alignment. They find somebody like me, and there are others, but they find somebody like me who helps them put all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle on the table and connect, as you said, connect the dots.
Yeah. And again, going back to the life purpose question, I think it's a really great question, and probably for a lot of people, hearing from a doctor is like, whoa, makes them stop in their tracks, as they say. And especially in the context of the kind of work you do, because from what I'm hearing, in that it ties, you as a self-professed doctor of common sense, it helps them hear their own common sense, their intuition, their sense of trying to be aligned, because as you said, it starts to tie in that's something that may not be fully understood within, and kind of lead them in that way.
It makes sense of life, and it even makes sense of the challenges that they're experiencing. In other words, that the question that I then would ask is, okay, so now look at your challenges, whatever they may be, as questions to you or ideas percolating up to the surface for you to be aware of and attend to, and see them as opportunities for when you grasp them and you can make more sense of them. All of a sudden, the relief that you're seeking becomes apparent and possible.
Yeah, and it's a great exercise for anyone, because as you were saying too, it may not be like you can, the skies will open up and you'll have that epiphany, but it gives you something to think about.
Yeah, well, and I use the analogy of a treasure hunt. Our life is a lot of things, but if we go from point A to point B, time A to time B, and we are struggling because we're waiting for something to happen or to achieve something or a relief of some sort, along the way, sometimes we lose the parts of the journey that also show us beauty, show us joy, show us all sorts of other experiences we can have. If we put our head down and we just try to get there, even if it's the relief of pain, there may be things in the path that are worth noting. And so the idea is to slow things down so that you can see beauty, because it's actually and experience it. It's that which provides the greatest relief. And it allows one to be patient. In fact, I think that it's time for a new medicine, and I would call that medicine slow medicine, because it's really the way of slowing down the process of living, so that we're not pursuing outcomes and resolution, but that we're just happy to be alive, and we're looking left and right all the time, up and down, inside and out, for the moment of beauty that makes this life worth living.
Right, and then we could hear more what's coming from within, too.
We can do that, too. Well, we become very powerful and very positive when that happens.
Yes.
And then things fall away. Things just happen to heal. What remains, the questions can be applied to them more specifically, more accurately. Why is this remaining? And then it's in the context of this treasure we're trying to find. That's a lot more positive than just to get rid of a problem.
So talking about awareness, thinking, what we've been talking about, I want to just talk about something else about diet. You talk about diet, but you talk about something that's kind of interesting. You don't see that much in books about diet and health, because you talk about the importance of eating a primarily plant-based, whole foods diet, but then you also talk about maintaining a food consciousness.
Right.
And so I'm wondering what you mean by that term.
Well, there's the common way that that's applied, and I agree with, is to be aware where your food comes from, and to be aware of what goes into the production of that food, and make choices based on that. Meaning, try to find food which is more beneficial overall. I think that's really critical. But the other part of the consciousness that I talk about is that I think it's as important what's on your mind when you eat as to what's on your plate. And I think people sit down to eat, and they may eat perfect food, but their thoughts are about something painful or horrific or upsetting. I'm not sure that perfect food is assimilated the way you would like. And so to me, the idea is to assimilate nutrients, that's why we're eating, and integrate them into our lives. And I think that gets coupled with our thoughts at the moment of the consumption of that food. And so I think it's just as important. I don't think it's more important. I think it's just as important. There are times in our lives where we don't have a choice about what we're going to eat. We may have to sacrifice some of our principles, or people can't practically manage to eat at this highest level of attention to where the food comes from. So there's compromises: cost, availability, family dynamics. So the best you can do under the circumstances, the way you can improve that food, even if it's somewhat compromised, is to make sure that you're in a state of blessing, whatever it is. Even if it's a toxin you're eating, that there is a way for you to say, well, let this not hurt me, because I appreciate all the things that went into it at this moment, where my life is, that this is the best I can do. And I honor it. I honor myself. I personally believe that's a prayer that will minimize the negativity of any of the food. We're not living in a sterile, pure environment. I think, frankly, that's a way of living our lives in every way we encounter the world around us.
Yeah, so in essence, you're saying food is energy. Mm-hmm. Food contains consciousness.
Yes, yeah, but our awareness of the food that as we're eating it, that adds another layer to it beyond the food itself. And the opposite is what's happening now to a lot of people, even people who are eating great diets from the point of view, let's say the experts say plant-based, organic, local, you do that. But let's say you're neurotic when you're eating, and you're neurotic because of all your food rules. Frankly, I think that neurosis is not really the most healthful place to be. I like the idea of making choices like that and feeling really 100% about it and feeling calm. But if you're not calm, you're neurotic. You're upset that cucumber may not be organic. And that's in your mind. That's plaguing you. Mm-hmm. That's a toxin.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the neurosis around the subject of food to me is something I'm responding to when I talk about food consciousness.
Yeah, so it's great for people to have that awareness whatsoever. In the United States, you mentioned how $2 trillion a year is spent on health care. Yet the health problems of the American populace just continue to grow at an exponential rate. Where do you think our system of medicine is failing us?
Well, we're, again, measuring health by certain parameters, like, what's our cholesterol, or what's, the incidence of heart disease, as opposed to the quality of the lives of the individuals we care about. And I think the way Western medicine is organized, particularly in the United States, is that it's, about the numbers, not about the people. And so I think that's leading us down the wrong path. So we're, good citizens, and we're following the path of that leadership, and we're often heading off the cliff of unconsciousness, of not really connecting the dot between our interest in our physical body and the necessary interest, mutual interest in the rest of the world, people, plants, animals, the environment, and then something beyond it altogether. So it's missing essential pieces. So it's very expensive because it's inefficient. It's not helping us achieve what it is that we're really after.
Do you think most doctors are content with the system of medicine as it is practiced in the United States? No,
I don't. So I was a medical director of a hospital, and there were 500 physicians on staff. And I would say that while they were happy with elements of the profession, they were proud of their skills, they were proud when they helped people. I think as a whole, They saw the institution to be broken, cumbersome, inefficient, unnecessarily expensive. The intrusion of insurance companies and other rules interfering with their relationship with patients, not just their decisions, but the time with patients. You mentioned that earlier. This has a lot to do with the insurance model, which has caused a problem. And as a result of this lack of time, physicians are very dissatisfied with the relationships that they have with a lot of their patients in general, and sort of the cumbersome nature of their practice, and therefore are unhappy people. Unfortunately, unhappy people. And if you ask the question, would you rather have a doctor who is happy to take care of you or a doctor who is unhappy to take care of you? I don't think people need much time for that one. So this is a symptom of a diseased system. And I think physicians are suffering.
Yeah, so it'd be great if you could have the physicians ask themselves the 77 questions.
I think it would be wonderful if my colleagues saw this as something very personally useful.
Yeah.
As I did when I first encountered these questions. I said, gee, this was a great way, a roadmap for me to be a healthier person. I saw this as a way to become a better father. That was one of my objectives. In addition to being a better physician, I saw this as just being better to my family and to the people around me, and to be a better neighbor, and to be more comfortable when I closed my eyes at night and went to sleep and wasn't thinking about the lists of things to do or the things that I did less than.
So really the subtitle of your book, A New Path to Extraordinary Health, could be A New Path to Extraordinary Living.
Yes, because early on in the book I sort of define that word health, and it is the verb living, yes.
Yes. So if you could command an audience of thousands of doctors of standard Western medicine who would be willing to listen in attention to your every word, what would you tell them?
Well, I think that it's similar to what flight attendants tell us when we get onto an airplane. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. We're not as good as we think we will be or could be if we're not really in the best state of health that we can be ourselves. And so with this new definition of health, then I would say, I would reach out to them and I would empathize with the struggles that they experience and say, there's ways around this. You can feel better about the work that you do by having a better relationship with your patients and a better relationship with your family. It doesn't start with changing the insurance model. It starts with the attention and the time you spend with patients, and you can make changes now. But you have to start with yourself. You have to clear up some of the, and release some of the baggage. So I think this is a way anyone could do that.
Right. So not much different from Gandhi saying, be the change you want to see in the world, be the healer you want to see that people have as a healer. Yeah.
Now, a lot of physicians, probably would say, well, I don't see my job as being a healer. I see my job as, sort of fixing fractures and, removing tumors, or, getting people to live longer. And if that's their job, then this may not be as interesting. However, all people are people, and they have relationships. And I think the appeal is on the level of their own personal life as much as possible. I think the byproduct and the benefit will be their practice, whether they actually intend that or not.
Mm-hmm. And living, again, extraordinary living.
Again, I think that they'll just be happier people.
Yes.
Yeah, which is I care about.
Yeah. So there's been, over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk and legislation and now implementation of healthcare reform in the United States. In your mind, what do you think would constitute true healthcare reform?
I think it's an educational thing. I don't think that the Western medical institution should be the bearer of all the responsibility for individual health. I think this starts with the education of our children and the reorganization of ideas like food and activity and sunlight, community. I think families play a very important role. So I think there's been, in all this legislation, an absence of sort of the personal responsibility. Even though President Obama did speak to that in his campaigns, I don't think the law really reflects personal responsibility. And even though I don't want to suggest that the system doesn't support people or doesn't need to support people better than it has. But I think people can do much better taking care of themselves. And I would like to see a system that supports that.
Right. And I've always said you can legislate like the quantitative changes in healthcare reform, but you can't legislate the qualitative philosophical changes. So it's true, as you say, education.
Well, it's societal. Right. It's taken all the other institutions, the socio-political institution, but the academic, educational institutions, religious institutions, and sort of having a real good meeting of minds to some extent where we say, we really have to get into better alignment, like what this Native American leader was saying. We have to get our soul back. We have to really understand that, the work that we have in front of us is got to include really the need for healing on a much larger scale, and that we all have a responsibility to play in it, and we need to sort of throw out a lot of the baggage that's interfering with us working collectively to that end.
You dedicate your book to this concept of our collective conscious evolution. What would you say is the relationship between conscious evolution and transformation of the field of medicine and society in general?
Well, I think that the overall purpose as I see it in our lives in the 21st century is to wake up, to realize that all this technology that we've been so impressed by and empowered by can serve us better if we now take it to another level, which is to return to that state of harmony with the natural world, and to see that as very impressive creatures, that we have a co-creative potential that we are not maximizing, that we can combine our efforts together that really transcends the physical plane and conceivably can co-create a new world, a new universe. I really believe that. I believe that that's the ultimate calling that we have, that we've seen with all this development. We're still reaching a glass ceiling of sorts, and now we can see evidence of the planet itself disintegrating, falling apart, or at risk. And so what are we going to do in response to that? Are we going to continue down the same path, or are we going to reflect on how to make the most of this technology, but not to get so overcome by it, addicted to it, that we lose touch with the grounding and the connection to the deep past and the deep future.
Right. And there seems, as anyone with eyes and more awareness sees, that there's more increased awareness going on. And some people even take it further and say that they talk about a tipping point where a certain percentage of the population achieve a higher level of consciousness and awareness, that there would be a more profound transformational shift that could occur. Do you say that you agree with that?
Yeah, I believe that. Again, I think this is somewhat a matter of faith, but I think there's evidence. I've read books on evolutionary enlightenment, from evolutionists who string together the history of conscious evolution and can create a clear trajectory based on historical fact, that we are increasingly more peaceful, more conscious, more aware. Even in this world where we're now so immediately aware of all the disasters, natural or otherwise, there's still more peace now than there ever has been, which is sort of the paradox, and a lot of people may not believe it because we're aware of every murder, every atrocity, and every natural disaster. But the fact is, it was worse. It was a lot worse. And so we can see evidence of evolution on a consciousness level, meaning the way humans can be beneficial. It doesn't mean that every experience, every encounter is beneficial, but it means collectively we see movement. So with that, I think that's very exciting because it suggests that if we attend to this more specifically, we can direct it even more and maybe increase the pace. And so yes, I think we're getting closer to a critical mass where that's going to dominate, in which case I see and feel a very, very positive and very hopeful future.
Yeah. And what would you say an individual can do on a singular level to affect positive change, positive transformation?
Elevate their consciousness. become aware of the potential that they possess. This gets to the root of self-esteem and importance. This is to see disease and discomfort in a context of learning, of ways as individuals through our own pain we can change the course first of our own lives, and then by virtue of our impact now when we are healthier, those of others. So that this becomes sort of an alignment of objectives, starting with the personal, but then with the collective.
Right. And so that extraordinary health, extraordinary living can keep expanding or going further into the collective.
Yeah, and how much nicer is it to do this with other people? You know, we live in silos often now. We can sort of shop online, we can get food delivered to us. We don't have to ever leave our room, and we can interact with other people. We can even have a social life. But how much nicer do people feel when they're actually congregating with others in a room or holding hands, see that others are going through much the same thing as we are, and overcoming them. I think part of human nature is to take substantial joy and pleasure in that type of achievement. It's not just academic. It's not just, I can do it that way as an alternative and it's easier and it's faster. There's something about being slow and being connected that to a human being feels best.
How do you envision a world in which there's increased awareness, and how do you think it will affect society as a whole in terms of the transformation of our systems and structures, from medicine to politics and food and so on?
I think these things go hand in hand. I think they happen simultaneously. In fact, I think they're inextricably linked, those two endeavors. That when the institutions begin to transform, as they they're being questioned. There's leadership emerging in all institutions that are now driving change toward globalization, towards inclusivity, towards tolerance, towards the development of beauty and sustainability. All institutions, I think, are moving in that direction, even though those in power who are holding on to the old paradigm are making a lot of noise and they're resisting. I think there's the emergence of all of this other good stuff. And I think that there's a palpable movement, and I think it's going to accelerate. And when it does, I think the experience is going to feel like exhilaration. What most people experience on a very human level as exhilaration, thrill.
Yeah, we're seeing that movement continue on.
Yeah. Now there's, all that said, I mean, there's still a lot of pain. There's a lot that keeps people awake at night. So we're not there, but we're moving in that direction, and it's going to take patience. It's going to take lifetimes. I don't necessarily anticipate that it's going to happen measured in decades, but we have no other choice but to do our best now. Well, we have a choice. We can decide not to do our best or not to attend to this, which is fine. I think there's a role for people who are naysayers. In fact, I think it's the dualism of the negative and positive that allows one to know that what's positive. So I'm sort of okay with those saying I don't really want to participate in this. It's those individuals, and it's even those individuals who do damaging things, which motivate others to do more positive things. I think that's the essential nature of our existence on the dualistic plane.
Oh, that's a good point. That's kind of the yin and yang of change.
Yes, I think the Taoist thoughts on living, this awareness of nature, at least on this plane. I'm not saying that there are not other dimensions that we can tap into and experience directly. I think that there are as well, but at least on this plane where we are all born and we all have these major senses, we're here to feel the contrast between, heat and coolness and light and dark and good and bad. That contrast informs us, and it motivates a conscious being to make choices, either to get out of the pain or into something more beneficial. We know how disease repels us. We want to get away from it as fast as possible, whether we really experience it or we're anticipating it or worried about it. But I like talking about the positive. And so what do we want to go toward? And it's the state of ease. The state of ease is that state of harmony. is that, is a state of true balance and well-being, connection, peacefulness, peace of mind. That's what we're going toward. Now, if you can create an image of that, and you see what it includes, there's something to post on your wall, your refrigerator, to remind you of where you're actually heading. And there are guideposts along the way, because it's that feeling of ease. Now, it's not the narcissistic or the hedonistic sense of pleasure I'm talking about. It's this really deep state of knowing that what you're doing feels right, feels good. It's along the lines of what the Buddhists talk about as right speech, right action. So it's a way to align, and it's a way to use imagery, and it's a way to use that concept and that feeling state, ease, which I think is a good way for us to gauge how we're doing. I started off the conversation talking about feeling. And I think, I ask that question to my patients, how do you feel? We do that in our lives all the time. How are you? The answer is a very long answer for most people, but we usually get one word or a nod. But the idea is to really ask people to examine that state of feeling. How do you feel? And then use that then as a gauge for how you're doing.
Right. So it really gets back to a lot what you were saying before of kind of getting in touch with what's within, to know what you're feeling, to know what ease feels like, all those things, that getting in touch with that intuition.
It's harmony. It's the way a musician tunes his instrument, in an orchestra, and resonance. You could be playing as a soloist, if you're a little off key or not, only somebody in the audience who has a great ear would know. But if you're playing with other artists, let's say in an orchestra of 106 pieces, you can't be out of tune, and that whole musical composition sound anything other than cacophony. So you have to tune to the resonance and the tone of all the others at the moment in the room, and that's sort of what the project of living in harmony is like. So we have to care about other people, and we have to tune ourselves. Now, we may decide among us that and between us that we want to play in this key or that key. And the key we're talking about may be in peace and beauty and harmony and light. So those who agree would all try to tune to that particular key. And I think that that's sort of what this is like. And that tuning is a vibrational frequency that we intend with our mind, but we restructure with our body and our body-mind complex.
Yeah, and that's really a big part of the healing, and in a way, back to that question, where healing comes from.
Right. And where we're going, and why are we doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions, Michael, based on the theme of new mind for the new world, about meeting the challenges of today with a more open mind and a bigger viewpoint. Where would you say we are today?
Well, I think that we're in a state collectively of emerging consciousness. That we were in a state as individuals of emerging consciousness in the last 2,000 years. With the advent of modern healthcare, where people survive common conditions that they would otherwise have to fear along the way. We've had the luxury, and the modern technologies, we've had the luxury of having a lot of extra time to ponder, time to think, time to read, time to communicate, as opposed to just survive. For those individuals who have the luxury now, and not everyone does, of course, but for those who have the luxury of that type of contemplation, I think that they're then faced with choices, decisions about what they're going to do with these thoughts, these new thoughts. And I think more people then are turning toward this collective project, which is to combine thoughts in a co-creative fashion with others, seeing the potential of this type of collective energy.
How did you get out of this old paradigm to this new emerging one?
I got very excited about the idea of being healthier the way I define it, particularly with the quality of my relationships, with being a better father, as I said, being a better husband, a better member of the community, a better teacher. So I saw this as a way that I can improve my own skills in those things that mattered to me. So it wasn't hard to let go of the tools that were broken. If you're looking to, again, if you're a carpenter, got a broken hammer. Well, you look forward to being able to afford the better hammer. It's going to solve a lot of problems. It's going to help you construct something with greater skill, greater ease, with a better end result. So I saw that I was replacing old, worn-out, antiquated tools for something a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit better. And in that sophistication, I'm not talking about more technological, but actually more balanced between the technology, the groundedness, and the higher purpose.
And what would you say, what are you doing differently now?
I live with my eyes open. I sort of have an awareness of more moments of my life. And my mantra is to look for beauty. So even in the experiences of pain, which I, as a human being, also experience, while I try as well as possible to alleviate suffering of myself and others, I'm also asking questions simultaneously. The essence of my book is to ask questions. And one of the questions is, what's the meaning of this? Where's the beauty in this? What can become beautiful as a result of this pain? And when I ask questions that way, I find answers. I find a solution that is not about fixing it. It's about growth. It's about transcendence. But it's to include where I came from. It's not to deny or negate the past and the experiences, regret things. I look forward to just building better.
And what are tools for people watching this that you could recommend for them?
Slow down. The tool of slowness. One of the programs that I offer people are group juice fasts. Green juice fasts. The word fast is an interesting word to use in the context of that. It's really a slow. By virtue of not eating or drinking just green juices, people's whole life slows down. Their metabolism slows down, their thought process slows down, their sensitivity rises. And when our sensitivity rises and we see that we have a lot, we can string out time differently. We can pay more attention to some of the details. Now, when we're in pain, it might be, seem ironic that I would recommend slowing down as if you would live in pain longer. But the fact is, between tense moments of pain, let's just look at labor, the process of giving birth. Every 5 minutes is a contraction, which is intensely painful. But for 4 minutes and 50 seconds, it's technically not so bad. Well, if the 4-minute and 50-second period could be elongated in terms of your subjective experience, then there's more of that than there is the 10 seconds of pain. So the idea is, if you string out your experience of time by attending to more details, particularly the beauty, you can change the quality of that experience. And so I think slowing down is one way of doing this, and that's why I think we need a new medicine, and that new medicine I would call slow medicine.
Oh, I like that. Instead of like juice fast, like juice slow.
Yeah, well, it's a slow. It is a slow.
What is your vision for the direction you see yourself taking your work?
Well, I think that I see my role now as a teacher. The word doctor happens to mean teacher in Latin. So while I didn't know that initially when I was 7 and I decided to go into this field, I realize now that what I was really interested in doing was helping people by giving them enough information, enough guidance to take care of themselves so that they wouldn't be completely wed to me in the sense that they'd be dependent, but they find my counsel useful. But that I see when people have their own tools, their own skills, their own wherewithal, the confidence in themselves to take care of themselves, that I'm achieving the goals of my work and purpose in my life better. And I would say that that really ascribes the qualities of a teacher. And so my interest is to teach more people, is to really just find a way for this message and my voice and this idea to reach more people, to help them, because I do believe it's really can be quite powerful. And it's the antithesis of more technology. It can be done for free. It can be done in somebody's home. It can be done in the mind of an individual who's just about to fall asleep. It just doesn't require that type of effort, because when somebody works in alignment, it's effortless.
Well, I think your work, your book, and your eloquence are great vehicles for pushing awareness about health and medicine and living. And if people want more information about your work and all the good things you're doing, including your book and Sunraven and speaking and everything, how would they go about finding that?
The easiest way is my website, drmichaelfinkelstein.com, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, Finkelstein.com. 77 Questions for Skillful Living is the name of the book and can be found online, the way most people find books these days. And I look forward to getting out into the public. I think contact with people is one of the things that I enjoy the most. And I think when people are together in a room, gathering in circles, they learn two ways. One is by what's said in the room, and the other is by just the feeling of that experience. And to me, that's another way to relay this concept, is just to put people into the experience. Once you're in the experience, you can navigate back to that much more easily.
Yeah, that's well said. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been
Thank you.
great, enlightening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.